From tensions in the Middle East to uncertainty about the future of the 2015 nuclear agreement and punishing U.S. sanctions, Iran's foreign minister addresses it all. Hello, everyone. I'm Asieh Namdar from the United Nations, and this is a special edition of The Heat. Iran's delegation is in New York this week for the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The meeting, of course, comes at a critical time, just days after a major attack on Saudi Arabia's oil industry. The United States has accused Iran of being behind it, accusations Tehran has denied. I had a chance to sit down with Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif for all the latest developments. Foreign Minister Zarif, thank you for being with us today.
Good to be with you again.
President Trump has announced new sanctions on Iran's central bank following the attacks on Saudi Arabia's oil fields. What are these sanctions about? This bank has been sanctioned before. What does it mean for Iran? What does it mean for the Iranian people?
Well, basically, it means that the United States is running out of options. It's desperate. The policy of maximum pressure has not worked. Now, the difference between these sanctions and the previous sanctions on our central bank are twofold. First, central bank, based on these sanctions, cannot even be involved in transactions on food and medicine. That means that central bank, which is the primary source of money for companies that buy food and medicine for Iran, can't finance them anymore. That means targeting the daily lives of ordinary Iranians. Second, the difference between this designation and the previous designation is that it makes it more difficult for the next administration to remove these sanctions. So they want to make negotiations impossible, want to make a change impossible. So you need to re-examine the position of President Trump that he wants to negotiate with Iran. He just imposed a type of sanctions on Iran, on the central bank of Iran, that would be very difficult for him to remove and for his successor to remove.
The president said these are the highest level ever imposed on a country.
Well, it may be. It may be. Imposing sanctions on a central bank of another country is unheard of. Imposing this type of sanctions on a central bank of another country is also unheard of. But it undermines his basic position that he wants to negotiate with Iran. How does he want to remove these sanctions? It makes it very difficult for him and for his successor to remove these sanctions.
U.S. troops headed to Saudi Arabia. U.S. Defense Secretary said it's in response to dramatic escalation of Iranian aggression. I want to get your reaction to that.
Well, it's interesting that the United States calls an unfounded allegation of an attack against a refinery unacceptable, but it helps attacks on civilians, attacks on children, attacks on women and elderly.
Are they both equally wrong?
No, we've been very clear that we had nothing to do with this. And the Houthis are engaged in self-defense. At least you can give them the credit that instead of retaliating against the city, against the hospital, against a school, as the Saudis have been doing in Yemen, they retaliated against the refinery. 100,000 Yemenis have died because of Saudi bombardments. 2.3 million Yemenis are suffering from cholera. Almost 60–70% of the Yemenis suffer from malnutrition. Now, they hit a refinery. Not a single person was killed. Now, this is a bigger disaster. Is this a bigger disaster than killing so many people over the last 4.5 years? For a war of choice, a war that could have been ended a week after it started, But the Saudis believed that with the help of the United States, they could win this war in 4 weeks. Now it's 4.5 years later, 100,000 casualties later, and they are still stuck in this quagmire that they built for themselves.
I want to get to Yemen in a moment, but I also want to talk a little bit more about these attacks. Iran, of course, has been accused.
This is about Yemen. These attacks are about Yemen.
You're
this
absolutely
has
right.
nothing to do with Iran.
But I want to ask your opinion about Yemen on what the solution in Yemen is. But just if you could just give me
Sure.
1 second. United States and Saudi Arabia have pointed the finger at Iran for being behind these attacks. And there's a reason suspicion has fallen on Iran. They're saying, the Americans are saying, this attack was sophisticated, at least 17 points of impact, traveled some 800 kilometers away. Okay, so Houthis who've claimed responsibility certainly have the incentive because of the war you're talking about, because of the bombardment of the Saudi-led coalition. But Foreign Minister, some might argue the Iranians also have an incentive to destroy or disrupt the oil supply of Saudi Arabia. President Rouhani last year said, if one day they want to prevent the export of Iran's oil, then no oil will be exported from the Persian Gulf. Do you see perhaps why they're saying maybe, or they're pointing the finger at Iran?
Well, if you want to talk about the incentives, and if you talk about who's winning, the United States is the biggest winner because it sells its military equipment that are even incapable of preventing the Yemenis from attacking with all the sophisticated US weapons in the hands of Saudi Arabia, but they can sell more weapons, they can sell more oil. We cannot sell oil. It doesn't matter how much oil, how much the price of oil goes up, we cannot sell oil. But the United States is finding new markets for its shale oil, for its shale gas. So if you want to look at incentives, and through incentives reach the conclusion who is benefiting from this, the US and Israel are benefiting the most from this situation. So let's look at the realities. The reality is that by saying that it was too sophisticated, well, the missile that brought down the most sophisticated US drone was made in Iran. Did we get help from anywhere? We were prevented from getting the minimum requirements of our defense, but we built it ourselves. Desperation, as they all say, is the mother of invention. When you see your children maimed, when you see your babies killed, that gives you enough incentive. By the way, the previous government of Yemen had a huge stockpile of sophisticated weapons. President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was supported by everybody, had a lot of weapons that he bought from everywhere because he wanted to build a very strong army, being a dictator. And that's how these people, the new people in Sana'a, the Houthis, as you call them, the Yemeni government, as a lot of people call them, have a lot of weapons at their disposal, and the requirement to defend themselves gives them the creativity to make the changes necessary. And they have claimed responsibility.
Is Iran helping the Houthis defend themselves?
No, we have supported the Houthis. We have supported the Yemenis. But we have said time and again that these have been made by the Yemenis, have been fired by the Yemenis, and that's what they have said too.
How do you de-escalate this situation, Foreign Minister?
War.
End the war, and I know Iran has had proposals on the table for ending the war.
Yeah, we had a 4-point proposal that we presented in April of 2015.
What happened?
Saudis were too arrogant to accept those proposals because they believed that with the weapon superiority that they had, they could win the war in 4 weeks. And we told them that you cannot win this war. This war is not winnable. You need to end this like any other war through political means, not through military means. They did not accept, and now they're blaming us. We offered them a way out. We offered our good officers. We still offer our good officers. We are working with the Europeans, with the E4, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, in order to put an end to the war in Yemen. And we are prepared to use our influence to deliver We have a Stockholm Agreement. We can build on the Stockholm Agreement.
What about chance of de-escalation or perhaps bringing down the temperature between Iran and the United States? Secretary Pompeo said what happened in Saudi Arabia was an act of war. And you've said if Iranian soil is attacked or there's any kind of military reaction to Iran, you've warned of an all-out war. Are these terms helpful?
No. The job of Secretary Pompeo and myself are trying to put end to war, use diplomacy. But unfortunately, I see that they are waging war, they are calling for war, calling something that has nothing to do with Iran. You have people who have the reason and the motive to defend themselves. Instead of condemning killing of children, destroying of hospitals, you call retaliation, reprisal, or self-defense against a refinery, an unacceptable act of war, is that you want to drag the region into a war. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to call for peaceful resolution of these issues. And we have offered a peaceful resolution of the quagmire in Yemen. I think Secretary Pompeo would do much better if instead of encouraging Saudis to continue buying weapons, if he would encourage them to invest in the restructuring, in the reconstruction of Yemen, in providing humanitarian assistance to Yemen, in ending the war in Yemen, and they'll find partners.
Will Iran, Foreign Minister, accept conclusions of a UN investigation into these attacks on these oil refineries?
Well, we have not been consulted by the United Nations. The United Nations, I don't know under what terms, decided to dispatch a group of people based on the news we've heard. We haven't seen anything official. So if we're not party to an investigation, if we have not been consulted about an investigation, then how can we
Is that the norm, to be consulted about an investigation? So if these investigators come out and say, we found so-and-so was behind this, regardless who is behind it, would you accept what they say?
If they say something that is not true, if they accuse us, then obviously we won't accept it. But they don't have a mandate. They don't have any base to go there. We heard from the Secretary General that he has sent them on the basis of Resolution 2231. There is no place in Resolution 2231 that gives them the mandate. And if they've been sent based on Resolution 2231, that means a prejudgment before even sending them that Iran had something to do with it. Because Resolution 2231 has nothing to do with Yemen. It is about Iranian nuclear agreement. Now, the Secretary General has failed to take any measure to protect the nuclear agreement, and if he wants to send a team on the basis of a resolution that has nothing to do with Yemen, then I don't know why we should accept the outcome.
Mr. Foreign Minister, what needs to happen for Iran and the United States to talk again? President Rouhani has said I believe it was President Rouhani and also the Supreme Leader Khamenei said talks are not going to happen. They're not going to happen in New York this week as long as sanctions are in place, as long as the United States does not join the JCPOA again. Is there anything beyond that that the United States can do to have some kind of opening or dialogue between Washington and Tehran?
Why should we? It's not that we didn't have dialogue with the United States. We spoke, we negotiated with the government of the United States for many months. We have an agreement. Now, President Trump said...
They don't like that agreement.
Okay, how about if we have another 2 years of negotiations with President Trump, and before elections, he loses the election, and the next administration says, we don't like this agreement. Is that a good precedent that the United States wants to establish? That your agreements with the government in the United States only last for as long as that government is in office? Now, President Trump says he can take this to Congress and have Congress approve it. Now, the agreement that we have with the previous administration was not an agreement between two governments. It was an agreement between 7 governments, which was then taken to the Security Council, and the Security Council endorsed it, and the United States is still a permanent member of the Security Council. So, and even if Congress approves it, didn't Congress ratify INF? Didn't Congress ratify other agreements that this administration has decided to withdraw from? This is not the only agreement that this administration has decided to withdraw from. So they're calling on us to come to their negotiating table, because our negotiating table is there. Wednesday morning at 8:30, we will be meeting 6 foreign ministers, plus the High Representative of the European Union.
This week?
Yeah, this week. The United States is absent by choice. Because
Would you sit at that table if the Americans show up at that table?
There is a condition for sitting around that table, and that is you need to be a member of JCPOA to sit around that table.
You bring up JCPOA. Is this whole agreement, Foreign Minister, completely falling apart? Does it have any chance of surviving? And talk a little bit about the French proposal for, I believe it's $15 billion line of credit, and also China's involvement.
Well, this agreement is an international agreement. It's not a US-Iran agreement, so it doesn't have to fall apart. This agreement was not based on trust. It was based on mistrust. That is why we put provisions in this agreement for violations. And we are responding based on those provisions to violations by the United States and to lack of implementation, fulfillment by the Europeans. So the agreement doesn't have to fall apart. Europeans believe that this agreement is in their security interest, so they need to invest in their security. And that's all that is about the discussions that we've had with the French. That if you want Iran to fully comply with the agreement, based on the agreement, you need to do your part. And they are trying to do their part, but even in order to do their part, they need the permission from the United States. We don't believe that should be the case. We don't believe that's practically possible, but if that is the decision of the French and the Europeans, we respect their decision.
And Iran is going to continue to enrich uranium beyond the limits that was allowed in JCPOA?
Well, the limits that were allowed in JCPOA, there was another provision that would allow us to not observe those limits if others don't observe their requirements and their obligations. You see, no international agreement can be implemented unilaterally. You have a multilateral agreement, everybody has to implement it. Otherwise, if you have provisions for remedies, you need to apply those provisions, and we are exactly applying the provisions, the remedies that we have foreseen in the agreement itself.
Well, talk to me about this $15 billion line of credit that French President Macron has proposed.
No, this is...
what is this about?
We said that the commitment of the Europeans was that we could continue to sell our oil and to repatriate the money. And we said, you need to implement your commitment. You implement your commitment by buying our oil, by pre-purchasing our oil, or by giving us credit in lieu of the oil. So these are the options that other members of JCPOA and the international community have if they implement their obligation. It's not.
Is that a big if, Foreign Minister?
Well, it's their obligation.
Yeah.
Well, if they are looking at the United States to give them permission to implement their obligation, I think that would be a long wait.
But has Iran been a little bit disappointed, perhaps, that the other signatories of this agreement have not, as you say, kept their side of the agreement?
Well, it is disappointing not just for Iran, but for the international community, that a global agreement can fall apart because one country tries to bully others.
Is China still buying Iranian oil?
Well, we continue to have relations with China. And
you didn't answer my question.
Well, I will answer the question to the extent that it is appropriate.
Okay.
We have good economic relations with China. We have good energy relations with China. Iran is a major source of energy for China, and we will continue to be.
You're not going to answer my question. Okay. Tell me about Iran's role in China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Well, Iran believes that Belt and Road Initiative is a major program that can enhance regional peace and stability, can enhance poverty alleviation in the region, can help poverty alleviation in the region, particularly in areas that are suffering from terrorism and extremism, and that is why we are a partner in the Belt and Road Initiative, both in transit areas as well as in development and reconstruction areas.
Foreign Minister, if I could get back to what's happening in the Persian Gulf again. The U.S. has put together a coalition to protect the waterways in your backyard in the Persian Gulf. UAE, Saudi Arabia have joined, Australia, Bahrain, United Kingdom are also taking part. How concerned are you about a terrible mistake or a miscalculation in the Persian Gulf that would lead to a military confrontation?
Well, everybody should be concerned, but we cannot pack up and leave the Persian Gulf, but the U.S. can.
And then talk to me about Grace 1, now called Darya, Adrian Darya 1. Did this ship defy sanctions, the European sanctions, and deliver oil to Syria? The foreign press in UK said Iran repeatedly gave assurances to the government of Gibraltar it would not deliver oil to any EU-sanctioned entity in Syria or elsewhere. It is now clear that Iran has breached these assurances. The oil has been transferred to Syria and Assad's murderous regime, and I'm quoting here.
Well, the seizure of the ship was an act of piracy because EU sanctions don't apply to Iran. EU sanctions, even EU doesn't claim that they apply to Iran. EU members have said that these sanctions don't apply to Iran. That's number one.
But Iran gave assurances.
No, hold on.
Okay.
We said that the destination of the ship was not any sanctioned entity, and we repeated in that statement by our embassy in London that we don't recognize your sanctions. And your sanctions do not apply to non-EU member states. And we told them that the reason for seizing that ship was something else. We tried. The ship went to several different countries, several different places. The United States prevented it to go to the shore. So we sold the oil in international waters.
You're not going to tell me where this ship went?
We sold, you know, the ship is in Syrian waters, but we sold this oil in international waters. Because you see, the United States prevents us from selling our oil. This is an illegal act that the United States has nothing to do with Iranian oil. Our oil is not under any sanctions. The US tries to prevent us, to cut our lifeline. Do you think we would just allow them to do it? We would sell to anybody. That's all what we are going to do. Otherwise, we don't have money to pay for the food and medicine of our people.
Two more questions. Iran, you and I have talked about this many times before, is holding a number of dual nationals. What is their status? I mean, they're name after names of people in legal limbo, Foreign Minister. Is there any kind of talk about some kind of prisoner exchange?
This is not about dual nationals. I mean, we have probably over 1 million dual nationals, maybe more. A few dual nationals are in prison in Iran, rightly or wrongly. I'm not discussing that because that's not my job. But there are a lot of single nationality Iranians in prison. Being a dual national does not give anybody immunity, but it should not be something that would hamper their possibility to live as a citizen of Iran. The judiciary has cases against them. As the government, we cannot intervene in the judicial process other than trying to help in humanitarian avenues and trying, that is how we can officially enter the exchange. We have offered to release these prisoners, particularly the Iranian American ones, for the Iranians and Iranian Americans who are in jail here in the United States. We have a professor who has been in jail here without charge for the past, I think, 11 months now. It's not that he committed a crime. He was arrested on arrival in the United States. He was given a visa to come, but arrested on arrival in the United States. The United States didn't want him to come. They could have refrained from issuing a visa to him. And they have kept him in jail without even charging him with anything.
And finally, Foreign Minister, football in Iran. Is there any chance, after the tragic death of this young woman who set herself on fire, is there any chance, is Iran any step to allowing women to go to football stadiums and watch football?
Well, first of all, it was horrifying to see the death of that young lady, and it's a source of serious agony for all of us. And the government and the judiciary have called for an investigation into what happened actually. Women participate as both players and as observers in many sporting events. There is a lot of hooliganism, unfortunately, in our soccer matches or football matches. And the government has been trying very hard to control that so the atmosphere is appropriate for women. The government wants women to be able to participate as spectators in football matches. And I hope that within a short period, the necessary requirements would be in place. The Ministry of Sports has been instructed by the President to expedite its attempts and its program.
Well, we're going to leave it on that note. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, as always, thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you.
And that's it for this special edition of The Heat. I'm Asieh Namdar at the United Nations. Thanks for watching.